Begin the current Daf, Mesechta Bava Metzia Daf, begin on the top line of the Yommi. We're in the middle of a discussion over here where we opened up the halacha in our previous Mishnah, which was continuing the halacha of Baal Talin, where we had an intricate discussion regarding Ger Taishav, and regarding Schiris, Behema V'Kalim, regarding what which is V'ayiv Lavin, and there's one positive commandment regarding the requirement to pay workers on time. So there is in Mishnah Torah Psukim, and then there is in Vayikra and Teres Kayanim, and the Gemara has three different opinions regarding what's applying to what, depending if you hold Gzer Shabbos, Achar Tzachar, if you don't, and even if you don't, could be that there are certain things, there are certain Ribuyim or Miutim, that would include something or exclude something, and our Gemara's in the middle of discussion regarding the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that there's no Chiyuv of Behema V'Kalim of Baal Talin. What does he do with regarding the drasha that the other opinion holds that the Tana of our Mishnah that learns up from the Elav Hunoisis Navshay, Dava Hamois Navshay Love, that meaning even whatever he's mishabed himself for, that you're going to be chayiv on Baal Talin, the Gemara asks what does the other Amanda Amar do with that, because he actually learns that out from a different source, from Itcha. Again, that's when you go back and forth, what does each one do with that pasuk? So that's where middle of that Gemara's discussion. Our world should be Il Neshama for we're discussing today's Daf. If someone doesn't pay the worker, so there's a Isra Baal Talin of not leaving the payment unpaid till the morning. Now in today's Daf we're going to discuss regarding if loy tavoi, if the guy doesn't claim the money, or ein loy, or if he doesn't have the money, or mcheretz l'chemeni, or if let's say he displaced the responsibility by saying you go to the store. So the question is if chayzer in a chayzer could that obligation go back to the employer or not once he already displaced it and it's going to the storekeeper? Also, the Gemara wants to know regarding Kabbalah is if you have a contractual agreement that he's paying by the job, would you also apply the halacha of Baal Talin? Sachin is Rabbi and the halacha that unlike most oaths that the Torah obligates, which is regarding the defendant swears and he doesn't pay, by a worker, the Rabbanan made it, they switched it, and they had that he swears and he collects. So begin the current Daf, as we had said, we're in the middle of discussing the halacha. Our Mishnah had said that echad schar adam, echad schar behema, echad schar kelim, whether one employs a person, rents an animal or utensil. Our Mishnah held yesh by mishum b'yemitin schravai, and yesh by mishum loy talim pula sicher et chad biker. He's subject to the prohibition against delayed payment for both day and night workers. In a brisa, the Gemara brought this discussion, as we had said, the two different opinions regarding what is the extension of this halacha, and we had brought different opinions regarding what is the halacha of the of behema and kelim. In that discussion, we had said that the interpretation of the word itcha in the pasuk, where we said that itcha is a ribui from behema v'kelim. That's how that mandama who doesn't learn sachar knows that behema v'kelim would apply even where it doesn't mention it in the Yikra, in Teres Kayanim. Then the Gemara said, okay, Rabbi Yehuda, what does he do with itcha? So he said, he needs it for Rabbi Asi's teaching, that even if he hires him just to harvest one cluster of grapes, he's going to violate Baal Talin. So then the Gemara says, okay, Idach, that was the last line of the previous Amid, the Tana of our Mishnah, where does he know that halacha from? He knows it from Ve'elo B'Noises Nafshay, that something that a person is Moisei Nefesh for, even just for one cluster of grapes, meaning even if he's hired just for a few hours, that you're going to be chayiv in the Isra Baal Talin. That's why Gemara continues in the top of Kovid Beis of Aleph. But Idach, now again, this is when you go back and forth, each one's sources. Bishvi Huda, what does he need? The pasuk of Ve'elo B'Noises Nafshay, which explains why you have to pay a worker on time, because his life is turning towards you. But he doesn't need it to teach you Dava Metzia Daf, meaning that even for one cluster of grapes, because that he knows from Itcha. So what does he do with this pasuk? He needs to tell like learn the brisa. It's actually to punish the person, as if you took the person's life. As the Gemara quotes a brisa that the maskana is this halacha of not paying a worker. Pasuk says ve'elav, he says nafshay, that to him he carries his life, meaning the worker, the employee, is moisa nefesh for the job that he's getting paid for. As the brisa explains, the name of Allah is Ebekedesh. Why is this guy going up on the high ramp and putting himself in danger to fall? Emanitlu Elon, he hangs from a tree when he's going up to harvest the olives and to harvest the dates. Almost and he's giving himself over to death, that maybe he's going to fall from the ramp or from the tree. Loyal schara, isn't it for his wages? So that's what one pshat is. Is that, what do you mean? He's putting his life here at risk. Of course, you got to pay the worker. But the main pshat we want is the next pshat. Another interpretation of that to him he carries his life, teaches us whoever holds back the payment of the worker, it's as if you took his life from him. And that's what the pasuk is teaching us, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the punishment of one who doesn't pay the worker. Which is actually machlekes Rav Huna, Rav Chizda, how to interpret and this the understanding of the pasuk. Chadam one says, nafshish l'gazlan. When we say that kilo neitel nafshoy, who's nefesh? One of them says the life of the robber, meaning the employer who's not paying. Chadam and nafshish l'nigzal, one says the life of the victim, that the life of the employee, that the employer is going to get punished as if he killed the employee. And the one who says it's the life of the gazlan, the pasuk is just telling you that he's causing death to himself, as the Gemara explains. According to the one who says that's the life of the gazlan, like says the pasuk in Mishlei, it says al tizal dal, don't rob the poor, kidalhu, because he's poor, meaning even though he's poor and he has no one to help him, don't rob him. Which that's one of the four interpretations of the word ki, which could be translated as in. So don't rob a poor person if he's poor. Don't crush a pauper at the gate. And it says after that, because Hashem will fight their fight, and he's going to rob their robbers. And what's he going to take from them? Nefesh, their soul, which the robbers are causing bad to themselves. That's if you hold that neitlis nafshay means as if he's taking his own life. Because by stealing from the pauper, from this poor worker, and not paying him, Hashem's going to take his life. Whereas the Mandam and is the one who says it's referring to the life of the victim. The pasuk says in Mishlei, it says, Kain Arch is called Boitza Betza. Because this is the path of all those who steal what they steal. As nefesh ba'olav yikach. The life of the owner, of the victim, is what they're taking. So you're like stealing his life, you're killing him by not paying him. Now, the Gemara wants to understand each one's other opinions. But the other one also says as nefesh ba'olav yikach, which seems to say the victim's life. Why is he saying it's as if you're taking the protagonist's life? I mean the robber's life. Says the Gemara, but all of the hashda, it means the current owner. Yeah, the pasuk says it's nefesh, but all of yikach, that the soul of the owner of the money, which the victim. No, it means the one who owns the money now. I mean, after he robbed, which is the gazlan. Now he has the money. He's the balam. Hashem takes his life. So it's talking about as if nitlas nafshay, that as if when he steals, as if he's taking his own life. Whereas for idach namadig wants to know, Hak said, what does he do with the other one's pasuk? Recovers kiveim nefesh. Sounds like that Hashem robs the life of the one who's the gazlan. Similarly, it's nitlas nafshay of the gazlan. So the Gemara, no, ma tam comment saying, what's the reason? Ma tam kaves kiveim. What's the reason why God steals from those who steal? Because they took a soul. And that the pasuk means to say that they stole the life of the victim, therefore God, he goes and exacts punishment from the Gazlan, but that man holds that as if Kil Niklas Nafshay is that of the victim. So, two different interpretations. Bakapon doubts what Rabbi Yehuda does with this pasuk. Ve'elav Hudai says Nafshay, that Ki'ilu, that it's Niklas Nafshay Mimenu, and the question is whose nefesh is nefesh al Gazlan, nefesh al Nigzel. But that's what he does in the pasuk. That's where the Gemara ends that discussion of the machlekes tanoim that we had. One of the Tana of our mission, which was the same as Tana Rabbi Shmuel, and then we had the Tanakama de Malchacha, as it was called, and then we had Rabbi Yehuda. Those were the three different opinions regarding what is the halacha of the Ger Toishav and regarding that of the Schiris Behim V'Kelim. It wasn't clear. It's the different opinions regarding which Isurim do they apply to and which do they not. Now, then our Mishnah said that Amosai, when did we say that you're going to transgress the prohibition of not paying a worker on time is Benmancha Tavoy, if the worker demanded payment. Loy Tavoy, but if he didn't ask for his wages, in Aibalav, then the employer does not transgress the Isser of not paying a worker on time. We're talking about in the Brisa that elaborates on this. It says in the Pasuk, Loy Salam Pula Sacher, don't leave overnight the payment of the worker. You would think even if he doesn't claim him because you still got to pay him. No, it says in the pasuk itcha. What do you mean itcha? That seems unnecessary. It means lodaitcha, meaning that according to your intention, but not for his intention. But if he is not asking, then it's ladaitai and not ladatcha. So therefore, then you're not going to violate. Now, you would think also that the guy's going to violate even if he doesn't have the money. He's still going to pay work on time. Tam 11, it says itcha, with you, which means sheyeshitcha, that there's money with you, and you're not paying. Then you violate. But if you're going to put on money, you're not going to violate this issue. Moreover, one of the cases of our Mishnah, you would think even if, let's say, you said, okay, you know what, I'm giving, it tells the employee, collect your wages as merchandise from a certain shopkeeper or money changer. You would think that you would violate the Isser there too, because you didn't pay on time. Tam 11, it says in the pasuk, itcha, with you. But not when you go ahead and you transfer the obligations to a storekeeper or to a money changer, then he's not withholding the wages. It's not itcha, and therefore he's not going to violate, even if the storekeeper doesn't give it on time. That's not going to be his violation of paying the worker on time. Now, we said in this halacha, the Mishnah, as we just quoted, the Brisa, the Mishnah told us, let's say he goes and he displaces and he transfers the obligation to a storekeeper or to a money changer. In Iver, he doesn't violate it. Now, I brought with the following question. Chayzer, does the employee go back to the employer if the storekeeper doesn't give him the merchandise? And then the employer is obligated to pay? By Ena Chayzer, or do we say he cannot return and demand wages from his employer? Rav Sheshes on Ena Chayzer, he can't go back anymore. The obligation's on the storekeeper now. But Rabbi Chayzer, Rabbi says he does go back. And Amar Rabbi says, where do I get this from that of course he will go back and demand his wages from his employer. But they tell me, the words in the Mishnah are, it doesn't violate. The diuk is mavrut le'av, it doesn't violate baltalim, but but he could go back and demand his wages, he just won't violate baltalim. Rav Shesham, he says, no, my eno eber, what does it mean it doesn't violate? In the b'toiras lava. He's not in the category of violating. In other words, he has no rights in him at all to even as a monetary claim to say that there will be any aveira of the wages of a worker, because it's not his obligation anymore. The storekeeper went ahead and took the obligation, which Taisa explains that there's no machlekes in the following two cases. If the worker specifically said, I need pater chalagamri, then afilo yitinli. Meaning, he says, I agree to collect for the money changer and exempt you even if he doesn't pay me. Pshita deina chayzer, but by a kinyan. He certainly loses his right to demand payment, even if he did not finalize the agreement with the kinyan, because he told him that. If he specifically said, I need pater chalagamri, shulchani, I only exempt you if the money changer pays me, pshita de chayzer. He certainly may demand payment from the employer. Says Taisus, Malik is only if the employee agreed stoma without specifying. Rashesha says in the chayzik can't return and demand his wage from an employer. Rabbi says chayzik can return and demand his wage from an employer, and that's the proof from our Mishnah that imcho etzel chemeni or etzel shulchani eno overlove yema averhu delay over hamahad hader. The employer doesn't transgress, but he's still responsible for his wages, and
And that's when he says, no, ma'in el over in the material's lover, it's no longer possible to transgress because he's no longer responsible. That's what they explain, that it would be specifically in such a case, that would be the machlekes between Rav Sheshes and Rabbi. Let me tell you that by the name of Rav Sheshes, ask Rav Sheshes the following case. Kablanus. If you have a contractor that accepted upon himself to do a certain job, and for a certain amount of money, and he wasn't being hired per hour, per day. So the question is, does the one who hired him violate if he doesn't pay him on time, or does he not violate batal? What's the question? On the one hand, do you say that a craftsman, a professional, he acquires the improvements that he made to the vessel, and he has rights in what he made it better, and because of his contractual agreement is what he's coming out with, and when he returns the object, let's say he gives back the car with a new muffler, so it's as if that the mechanic is selling the improvement that he had rights to. It's like he's selling a muffler when he makes the car better, or he does an oil change. He's like selling that improvement, and therefore valvahi. So there's no schiris here. You're not an employee. It was a loan that you owe me. I lent you $500 in your car, and therefore there would not be a baltalan. They say that no, the craftsman doesn't acquire the improvements in the vessel. It's not yours. But seriously, you're doing a job. You're cleaning out the pool, and you're making that there's no dirt over there. But you didn't acquire anything in the pool, and you're a paid laborer, and therefore there would be a baltalan. So that's the question. Someone Rav Sheshes says, "Oiver, you violate baltalan also by a kabbalah." Now, the bottom place it says, importantly, he says that you could have this isser baltalan by a contractor, for example, when he's getting paid for a job, when there is no improvement to the vessel, as the Gemara is going to shortly tell us. But Rav Sheshes actually holds, Uman is kind of Schwartzberg, as Taisus brings in the Gemara and Bava Metzia Daf. This that they asked from Rav Sheshes, they didn't mention in their question this principle of Uman kind of Schwartzberg or not. They just asked him, is a kabbalah of batal or not? The Gemara is saying this tzadadim of Uman kind of Schwartzberg or not, because in the simple understanding, that's what the question is dependent on. But actually, Rav Sheshes says your Iver doesn't hold that Uman ain't a kind of Schwartzberg, because he actually holds Uman is kind of Schwartzberg. So that's what the Gemara wants to say right now. Shortly, that Leim Misayele, the Gemara thought it's dependent on each other, as the Gemara is explaining it. Rav Sheshes actually explains that no, you're Eiv Batal. He actually holds that Ein Uman Kain B'Shvach Kli, meaning that you could still be Eiver, even though Ein Uman Kain B'Shvach Kli. The Gemara thinks it's dependent one on the other. The Gemara thinks, if Ein Uman Kain B'Shvach Kli, then if Uman Kain B'Shvach Kli, then there's no Batal. If Ein Uman Kain B'Shvach Kli, then there is Batal. It's actually not true. Rav Sheshes says that Eiver is actually holds that Uman is Kain B'Shvach Kli, and still you could be Eiver. As the Gemara is gonna show you a case of a contractor that's still getting paid really for the work that he's doing, and therefore there is no Shvach Kli at all. So even if you hold Uman Kain B'Shvach Kli, you're obviously not doing a sale or a loan, as you're calling it, and therefore there will be an Eiver of Baltam. As the Gemara says, first the Gemara asks a question, but time learned a brisa that actually says that ain't no Eiver. The brisa says clearly that a kabbalah is not Eiver. Says the Gemara, no, Hasam Shimcha Eitzel Chamin and Eitzel Shulchan. There's because you designated that the payment for the contract is going to be by a storekeeper, by Home Depot, that he has a $1,000 credit, or by the money changer. So that's in general that you're not going to be Eiver. But in general, you would be Eiver. So the Gemara says, name is Yele. So the Gemara said, let's support Rav Sheshes that you see that you're over Baltalin on the Kabbalah. Because the Brisa says, if someone gives his jacket to the tailor, Gemara, so he finishes the job. Vaidi, lets him know, I'm done with your suit. Even if it's already 10 days once he finished the job, you don't violate Baltalin. But, let's say he delivered the suit to the guy's house. At noon, once the sun sets, you're violating Baltalin. Okay, that's in general regarding the halacha of like it's only once it's picked up. But the Gemara says, but if you're going to say that a craftsman, a professional, a contractor, a tailor, someone that's doing a job, that he acquires the benefits in the vessel, and it's essentially like a sale, am I over? Why would you be over? Obviously, because, and this is what Hafez explained, what the Gemara thought to prove that this point, which is not true, Rav Sheshes himself could even hold your over, even though Uman is not kind of b'shlach kli, because as Amar Amori Berei the Rav Kali says, we're talking about begarda de sarbala. We're talking about with fulker balaz, which is to comb, to like be mekarid, that there's no shvach in the kli. Because if you would leave the garment as it is, it actually would last longer. The combing that they do maybe makes it nicer, but it doesn't make it better. And therefore there is no shvach kli. So therefore, it's not a stira. Even if you hold umin koine b'shvach kli, you could still say that you'd be over in the case when there is no shvach kli. So then the Gemara says, wait, but that doesn't make sense. Lamai yovenale, why are you giving this garment to this tailor, let's say, this comber, to comb it? You want it to be soft. Well, hainu shivche, that is its improvement, because some people prefer like that, because it makes it more warm and it's more beautiful. So even though it doesn't last as long, there's still a shvach in the kli. So how could you say that there's no shvach kli, and therefore that you're trying to prove, you're trying to answer that, that's why you're being over, because there's no mechir over here of a shvach. No, not true, there is a shvach. So the Gemara says, no, you're right. It's not talking about the case of karida. No, it's not necessary. We're talking about the R Shloimy Schwartzberg. You hired him to do the banging, meaning the first thing they do is called actually fullier, which is like a kicking. When it's brought from the house of the weaver, so they bang it with their feet in a wooden vessel with water and appropriate ground. But that's not with kablanas. That's a schiris, because whether they make it better or not, the guy gets paid according to how many times he bangs it. And bacha b'ma'asa, every single bang is how much more he gets. So therefore, that's why it's not a raya at all, because it could be that Uman is kind of b'shvach, and therefore you would not be over. Here, the reason why you're being over is because it's not really a kablanas. What do you mean? This is like a tailor. This is a guy who does a job. Yeah, but the job he does is just for banging. It doesn't make a difference if it's improving or not. And therefore, that's why it's like more like a schiris. And again, that's why it doesn't come into the question to being a raya to this question of the oiver of the kablan or not. It's more like that of a schiris. Tin Damed Beis said, the Mishnah said that a unique halacha that a sacher bizmanoi, if a worker demands payment and the employer claims to have paid, so it depends. What our Mishnah was saying is during the proper time for payment, so then the employee swears and he collects his wages, which the Gemara wonders. Why did the rabbis institute that the employee that he swears and he collects? We know throughout the entire that it's the employer, the defendant, he's the guy who swears and he gets off the hook. So I'm going to read the Mishnah. It says, halachas gedel l'shamikan. There's great halachas that we have learned over here. Meaning, like those that come count in Mesech Shvuz and Dal Beis by those that are nishbom and Heitlin, that they instituted that the party should swear and collect, which is a sacher, employee, a nigzil, a victim of theft, a nechbel, a victim of an injury, and a chemei al pekasai, you have a storekeeper on his ledger, they all collect instead of the other party swearing to defend. So the Gemara jumps in first, the wording that he said, halachas gedoyle shamakan hahani hilchas eninu, where these are like halacha l'meish mesinais, but hani takanas ninu. These are only takanas chacham, as the Gemara explains within the Shavuos. So Elam Rabbi Mishma he amends, you're right. Takanas gedoyle shamakan, not halachas, but great takanas, great institutions were taught over here. The Gemara jumps on the wording again. Gedoylos? What? These are big takanas, mechal dekatanas, the small takanas chacham make? Which, as Tais explains, that even though we find elsewhere, the Gemara is asking only over here, but akapanim, the Gemara says, Elam Rav Nachman Shmuel, you're right. No, the word should not be takanas gedoylos, takanas kavua shanakan. That it's appropriate to make it established, to uproot it from the biblical halacha. Because you're right, midiraisa, so someone that has to pay, he swears to not have to pay. As the passage that he takes the oath and that the guy doesn't have to pay. Here, they took the oath from the balabayas and they put onto the sacha. So the Gemara wonders, what the Gemara explains. Shvu the balabayas. Really, what happens is that the Torah only obligates the defendant, in this case the employer, to be nishba benifta, to swear and be exempt from payment. But Kriya Banla Shvu the balabayas, and the rabbis uprooted the oath of the employer, and the rabbis instituted that the claimant, in this case the employee, he may be nishba benifta, to swear and collect his payment. Why? Because of the livelihood of the employee, he's depending on this check, and therefore they made it that he could swear and collect. So the Gemara wonders, says, wait a second. Because of the livelihood of the employee, we're going to cause a loss to the employer. Why does that excuse the biblical rights of the employer to swear and say, well, I already paid? So the Gemara, no, the employer himself, he's pleased that the employee will swear and collect. So they'll get workers to work for him. Workers will not want to agree and enter into a contractual agreement if they're not going to be believed to swear that they didn't get paid yet. Says the Gemara, but you could say the same thing the other way too. You could say that the employee, he himself is pleased that the employer will swear and remove and his obligation and make him lose his wages, so that he'll hire him, because the employer won't hold back from hiring, because he'll be afraid to say, I don't know who this guy is. He's going to claim for me after I paid him already that I didn't pay him. So you could say the same svara the other way too. Says the Gemara, no, you don't need incentives to want the employer to hire, because employers need workers. So of course he's going to have to hire the employee. We don't have to incentivize, we have to incentivize the workers. Says the Gemara, but you can say the same svara the other way too. Says, but the workers also by default have to be hired because they need to feed their family. So why do you have to incentivize them? So Ella rather says the Gemara, right, a whole different shot. The reason why that we take the shvua with the raisa on the employer and we rabbinically switch it to the employee is balabais towards b'poilamu. It's a different svara. The employer is busy with his workers. He is overwhelmed. He thinks that he gave to this worker and he didn't give it to him because he has 100 workers. This worker has one boss, one employer. So therefore, we're going to switch it from the employer who scattered with all his workers. He's not going to know it specifically. We're going to switch it to the worker. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, Nesiv Leibelei Shvua, which Tais explains, and he asks as a question. He says, "Wow, what is the Gemara asking? What are you saying? You're saying that you should give it to the worker without an oath, but what is it? It can't never happen that the employer is telling the truth. Why would you say that you would automatically switch it and make it that the worker could collect even without swearing?" So this Taisus, it would seem that to the Gemara that the Tanakama assumed that we assume for sure the employer forgot, and he's saying I don't know, and that's what we're saying that the worker is definite, and therefore we should say that we should allow the worker to collect even without an oath at all. Which the Gemara says, you're right, but we want to appease the consciousness of the employer because he thinks that he did pay. And this discusses, but regarding other cases when you're right, you wouldn't need an oath, but al kapanim, since he thinks he did pay, you're right, we're assuming that he didn't because the worker would be more definite than the employer, but to appease him, we have the worker take an oath. But now the Gemara asks different questions to avoid this whole problem in the first place. Why doesn't the employer always pay in front of witnesses? So there won't be any doubt. And people have asked these questions in the past. Why don't you write shtaras or like what? Give it without it, then he'll give it to him without an oath. Institute that every person who hires workers, you have to pay in front of two witnesses. And if they say that I paid it without witnesses, then you should have to give it without an oath. Says the Gemara, it's a good point. All these questions are great, but in the real world it's not so simple. It's trichelu milsa. It's definitely a big difficulty to have to try all day when he's paying his workers, Mark and John and Bob and whatever, they're all leaving and have to get two witnesses every time to come. It's not such an easy thing, so although it's a great idea, in the real world it's not so simple. So you want to say, okay, but why don't they institute that the employer will always pay in advance the payment in the morning before they do the work, where if the worker comes later on, he's not going to be believed because we know that every employer pays in the morning, and you'll know that because no worker will work then unless he gets paid in advance. Says Gemara, no, shneim reitzim ba'akafa. Both of them they both prefer him to work on credit. The employer sometimes doesn't have money in the morning yet; he didn't have the job done, and the worker, he's afraid he's at risk of losing the money while he works. So they both prefer that it's not done that way. They prefer that it's working on credit. But then says the Gemara, if that's the case, that you're telling me that the employer, he's overwhelmed, he forgets, and therefore we don't believe him when it's regarding a contradiction with the employee. So I have a question. I feel it cuts us nami, that even if they have a disagreement regarding how much money was made up, how much was promised for the wages, we should believe the employee because the employer, he's dealing with a whole company. He has 100 employees. You remember if we made up that you're going to give me this bonus or that bonus? I remember. You're the one guy I deal with. So Allah Matanya, why do you learn the Brisa? That's not the case. Brisa says, Uman Omer, if the employee, if the professional, he says, Shtaim Katasli, you promised me that you're going to give me 2 coins as payment. Allah Omer, and we'll call him the employer, but the guy who hired him, he says, look, like it's not the halach, it's not true. I only promised you 1 coin. Says the Brisa, the employee who is trying to collect, the onus of proof is on him. He has to bring the right. But why? Didn't we say that a guy's running a whole company? He remembers what he told the guy who was going to do the delivery, how much he's going to pay him? He probably forgot. So we should believe the worker because he's the one guy that he's working for. So why are we saying that? Even if he's preoccupied, the employer remembers the terms of his hire. He remembers how much he promised to pay him. And therefore we'll say how much to make on the right. But then the Gemara asks, on this principle again, that you tell me that the Balabaya is torrid and he's overwhelmed, then and if we don't believe him, if that's the case, then even after the allotted time, let's say it's already the next day, and the worker comes and claims, says I wasn't paid yet, we should believe the worker because the employer doesn't recall these things, and the employee is saying he wasn't paid yet. So now why we learned in the Mishnah that said of his money, once the time of the immediate time period right after the work, which is if it's a day labor, it's the night, if it's the night labor of the day, which is the same, it correlates with the Baal Talim. We said once that first time period passes, in this ribbon, we can't swear and collect anymore. Why not? Why don't we believe the employee versus the employer if he's paid enough? So you might know, here we run into the halachas of chazaka. There's a presumption, ein balabais oivim Baal Talim. We don't think that the employer is going to violate the issa in the Torah of not paying on time. So in that time period where you didn't violate yet, yes, we'll believe the employee versus the employer. But if that already passed, and now you're going to be presuming that you're saying he didn't pay you, you're telling me he's over issa in the Torah, that we don't believe you. Says, but didn't you tell me Balabai's Tarba Pailavu? That he's busy with all his workers and therefore he's not aware, he's not conscious of it? Says Gemara, yeah, and immediately that was only said that's only before the time of when he's obligated reached. But as continued up Kofi Gimel and Aleph, but what does Manchiv? But it already came time for his Chiyuv. A Yid remembers that he has an obligation and he'll recall, and therefore he'll pay on time. And therefore, there's a chazaka that the Baal Bais is not going to over Baal Tal. So on that, says the Gemara, I have a question the other way around too also. What? And are you telling me that the employer is going to violate the prohibition of stealing? That's what you're presuming also. You're telling me that you're going to believe in the employer because he's not going to be over in the Torah. But now by suspecting the employee, you're telling me he's violating of stealing because he really was paid already. Says the Gemara, no hasam trei chazaki. There, by the balabais is two chazakas, chazaka here, by the employee is only one chazaka. The Gemara explains. Gabi balabais, in other words, in the merit of the employer, it could trei chazaki. There's two chazakas and in his rights. First of all, the balabais of Mishal Tal. We said we don't presume that the employer is going to violate the prohibition of not paying on time. First of all, number two, that generally a worker doesn't delay getting his payment. So that's a chazaka also that he was paid. Whereas here by the worker, there's only one chazaka, that he's not going to be able to tigzel. And therefore we believe the employer over the employee in that case. Now the Mishnah concluded by saying, in yesh eid mishatavai, but if the employee brings witnesses that he demanded payment during the allotted time, then he can swear and collect even at a later time. But the Gemara asks a question, the Gemara understands in a certain way. The Gemara says, but he is claiming in front of us. What do we need witnesses that he claimed it, that we need to say this halacha? As Tyson the Masala Tavale Kaman explains, the Gemara assumes at this point that when it says if there's witnesses that he claimed him, means even at a later point in time is when the 8 witnesses were there. So the Gemara is asking, what do we need the witnesses? He's claiming that right now, in front of us right now. So on that, Ravasi clarifies, no, we mean that they're testifying shetava bizmanai. The witnesses he brings witnesses that he demanded payment during that period when he was able to swear and collect, and he says that I came then, and the witnesses are testifying that he didn't pay then. But the Gemara says, why is that such a raya? But maybe subsequently, after the witnesses left, maybe then he paid him that day, where he didn't violate Baal Talin. So Amar Bai says, no, Tavari calls Mane. He had witnesses the whole day with him, that he continued to knock on his door until he violated Baal Talin. So the Gemara says, okay, but the Ilm Parley, what? So forever he's not going to pay him? Because he knocked on his door all day and he didn't give, so you're telling the employee is going to be believed forever to say I never got the money, and if the employer wants to swear we're not going to believe him, what? So much he's going to delay the payment of the worker? So Amar Okvi says you're right. We're talking about Keneged Isa Yom Shel Tviyah. Only one day after the time of when he could usually be Nishba B'Naitel, Chacham gave him one more day. If he has witnesses that testify that whole first day he was trying to get it and the guy didn't give it, one more day is when the Chacham gave him the ability to swear and to collect, because we assume the employer did not yet pay. But you're right, after that, he wouldn't be believed anymore to swear and collect. Thank you. Anytime.